free to be himself, even when the enemy is there and taunting him. For David, a very real enemy. For us, a spiritual enemy. And if you look through the story, 1 Samuel 17, 8 to 10, Goliath, the great Philistine leader, comes out onto the battlefield. And he says, why, this is to all the troops, why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man, having come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistine said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. On hearing the Philistine's words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And then it says that didn't just happen once. It says, verse 16, for 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and every evening and took his stand. See, the intimidation wasn't just once. It was over and over and over again. Verse 23, as he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped forward from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. See, we'll never stop hearing it. The taunts from the enemy, you can't do it, you're not up to it, whatever it is, we'll never stop hearing. They will always be there. But what David does is he looks at them and he hears them. But then he comes back to his place of faith. And he says, well, you can say all you like, but this is my God. And my God's a big God. And he's much bigger than you. And we'll look at exactly what those words are in a minute. But you know, every time in these intimidations, they get worse and worse. He says, am I a dog? You come at me with sticks. It says the Philistine cursed David. Come here, I'll give your flesh to the birds. Huge intimidation that David could have been very frightened by. And it is the strategy of the enemy at all levels to intimidate us, so that we won't fulfill the spiritual DNA, if you like, that is inside of us. The things that God has planted in us, the dreams and visions that he's planted in us. It is the enemy's biggest tactic to intimidate us, so that we won't ever consider doing them. See, David was free from that fear. It says in those earlier verses that we just looked at, that for the others around him, on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. It also says in verse 24, when the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. See, that's sometimes what fear makes us do, isn't it? You know, we see something, we see the challenge, we see maybe what God is nudging us to do, and our biggest response that we want to do is just run in the opposite direction. I remember back to those years, 8-9 years ago, when God began to nudge us out of teaching. And I love teaching. It was a great career to be in. And but we were doing more and more in church life, and we couldn't actually keep up with everything. We had young children at the time, and we said to God, what do we do? We have so much we want to do, for you and for the kingdom, and then school is busy as well, and we love being there because there's a kingdom there as well. And what do we do? And God said, I want you to give your job up. And we wanted to run in the opposite direction. We didn't want to do that because it was so insecure and so frightening for whatever that might bring for our future that we didn't really know. And we got little children, and what do we do if we both give up salaries at the same time? What's that going to look like? And sometimes we can be fearful about very practical things like that. Sometimes we're fearful about our health. Sometimes we're fearful about the most irrational things. I saw this picture recently. I thought, that's an interesting one. Have been frightened of a shark falling on your house? Quite sure what they do with that. Sometimes, though, our fears, they are very irrational, aren't they? You know, we lie in bed at night fearful that, someone's going to break in. Very unlikely that these things are going to happen in that moment, at that time. And our fears can take over us. Our fears can make us just like the rabbit in the headlight, stand still and not do anything. Or they can make us hold back when we know we should be pushing forward. Our fears can make us run away. But you know, the Bible says perfect love casts out all fear. If we know, and we keep coming back to that, if we know that we're loved, if we know that we've got a big God that we can trust in, if we have seen in the small things that God will come through, when we're fighting the lion and the bear, well, God came through then, so God will come through now. And if we have that faith in our God, who is so much bigger than everything else, and we know we're loved by that God, then that love will push out the fear. That love will cast it out. It's a very strong word. They can't coexist together. If we're frightened, it's because we're not completely accepting how much we're loved and how much we can trust God. You see, sometimes I think I'm frightened that God won't be big enough. He won't protect. He won't do the best. And then I have to come back to that place and say, sorry, God. Sorry, God, I know that's not the truth. I know the truth is that you're bigger than that. I know the truth is that you want what's best for me. I know the truth is that you love me. And then that faith will rise up in my heart again. And I'm sure that that was the same for David. Because he didn't let that fear grab a hold of him. And he didn't let disappointment grab a hold of him either. See, it also says in those verses, in the same verse in verse 11, it says, on hearing the Philistines' word, same verse, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Dismay, this word dismay. I looked up what it means. You know what dismay means? It means to destroy the courage or resolution by dread or apprehension. I'll say that again. It's to destroy courage or resolution with dread or apprehension. Or another definition of it in the dictionary says it's a sudden or complete loss of courage in the face of trouble or danger. That's what dismay is. And when I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that there is so much that goes on in our lives where we get disappointed. And if we then bring that disappointment to that moment where there is trouble or danger, then our tendency will be to stay in that disappointment and to think, God's not big enough. God can't do this. And for David, even though he'd had maybe disappointment, because we all have, and all those Israelites around him are in that disappointment and they're in that dismay, and it's destroying their hope and it's destroying their courage, David is able to walk forward and say, no, I'm not going to be dismayed, I'm not going to be discouraged because you're my God. And for us in church life at the moment, there is so much going on. There will be in all of our churches, I'm sure. But in the last couple of weeks, a very good friend of mine, her father was diagnosed with cancer and died within 3 weeks. Tragic loss of life. And another very good friend of mine in the church yesterday had a miscarriage and lost her baby. And it reminded me of both of those things in my own life when my mum died when I was in my 20s. And we in early marriage years, we had a miscarriage too. And it reminds you of all those things. And it also reminds you of that journey that you go on with them. Of being disappointed. Of being upset. Of saying, God, why didn't you change that? Why didn't you do anything about that? And then that journey that you come through when you say, yet I will praise you. I don't understand it all. I have questions. But I know the truth. And the truth is that you're a God of love. And the truth is that you have come into this world to make it different, to make it better, to conquer death, to conquer evil. That we live in this fallen world where there is sickness and there is evil and there is disease and there is war. But Jesus, you came. You came to conquer it. And you're bigger than all of that. And one day, not yet, but one day in the future, all things will be made new. And you get to that place, and again, that means the faith can just rise up inside of us to be free again, to be who